Gallup has a really fascinating poll out on the issues that Americans care about the most. So let's run through that list here for you. The availability and affordability of healthcare is the number one issue. And it's been the number one issue, get this, for 5 years. Healthcare is on the minds of Americans. And understandably so. You know, I as well have had horrific experiences with the U.S. healthcare system. Just terrible. You know, from health insurance companies taking advantage of you and overcharging you, or you go to get something done at the doctor after you're paying these massive premiums every month, but when you go to the doctor, they still hit you with a bill, and they're like, yeah, it's cool, but you have a deductible of X amount of money, so here, you have to pay the first $1,000, and then they'll pick it up after that. Why the fuck have I been paying you every month if when some shit happens, you go, that's nice, now you pay for it? Well, why the fuck am I paying you? Why the fuck am I paying you? What a ridiculous... It's just so fucked up, man. And they're price gouging us. We know they're price gouging us. It's not just my opinion. It's a fact. Look at the fucking bonuses the top of these companies are getting. You have an unnecessary for-profit middleman. That's the way this works. So Americans know they're getting screwed. They know they might have different solutions, or they might not know the finer points and the nuances of it, but the sense they get is right. And what they feel in their gut is, we're getting fucked over here. So it's the number one issue. 55% of Americans care a great deal about the affordability of healthcare. Then you have crime and violence, which I thought that's interesting. Because if I'm not mistaken, the crime rate is not historically high at the moment. In fact, it's pretty low. So it's weird that the number two issue that people care a great deal about is crime and violence. By the way, the answer to the first issue, people caring about healthcare, Medicare for all. Not hard. Every other developed country has it. It costs less money. It covers everybody. There's no unnecessary for-profit middleman. You get sick, you get help, you go home, you don't pay dick because it comes out of your tax dollars. So that's the answer to problem number one. Problem number two, crime and violence. Well, the answer is legalize, tax, and regulate drugs. Because crime goes up when you have a prohibition against drugs, because you make the drug cartels more powerful and there's more crime as a result. So even though the crime rate is historically low, it would get way lower if you legalize, tax, and regulate drugs. So that's the answer to problem number two. Problem number one, Medicare for all. Problem number two, legalize, tax, and regulate drugs. And by the way, also, if you legalize, tax, and regulate drugs, you free up police officers to go after people who are actually criminals, rapists, people who did assault, murderers, and stuff like that. And in some ways, I'm conservative when it comes to, issues of policing and crime. It's just, I'm only conservative if you're enforcing the laws that really should be laws. If you're enforcing laws that are bullshit laws, well then no, I'm not conservative. I'm the most liberal person in the world, because I say, stop fucking enforcing those laws at all. Get those laws off the books. But if you have the proper criminal code, well then I become conservative. I'm like, no, you have to fucking enforce those laws. The next one is federal spending and the budget deficit. That's interesting. Perhaps the American people should say something to the Republicans who just passed Trump's tax bill, which adds $1.4 trillion to the deficit, as the Republicans pretend like they, are against deficit spending. Well, then why'd you just add $1.4 trillion to the deficit as you passed a tax bill that gave 83% of the tax cuts to the top 1%? And then, by the way, we're also bombing 8 different countries right now, and we just increased the military budget massively in a gargantuan fashion. So, you're concerned about budget deficit? You should talk about the fact that we're doing endless war, and you should talk about the tax bill that just handed the keys to the Treasury over to Wall Street and the mega rich in the country. Then the next biggest issue, I'm amazed at how big of an issue this is. Well, actually, I'm not really, because of all the mass shootings, but the availability of guns is one of the top issues of the American people now. That's amazing. So the American people are saying, listen, we got to do something on these guns. You got to do universal background check. You got to ban high-capacity magazines. I mean, the polls are overwhelming on that. But it's not just that the polls are overwhelming on that issue. It's that Americans are thinking about that issue all the time. That's fascinating. And then below that, drug use. I think the opioid crisis falls into that. Then you have hunger and homelessness. 44% of people care a great deal about hunger and homelessness, which, by the way, is an issue that is never spoken about. Never. I'm not even sure Bernie Sanders ever speaks about it. He speaks about, the war on the middle class and working people. But poverty and homelessness is almost never brought up. We have 400,000 homeless people, about 40,000 homeless veterans, never brought up. And by the way, the answer is to just give them all a small apartment. Because you net save tax money if you do that. So it's the fiscally responsible thing to do, and it's the moral and ethical thing to do. And then you have Social Security, the quality of the environment, the size and power of the federal government, the possibility of terrorist attacks, race relations. The economy is all the way down there, 34%. Illegal immigration, 34%. The availability and affordability of energy, 25%. Unemployment, 23%. So unemployment's relatively low at the moment. However, there's a giant caveat with that fact, which is a lot of the newer jobs are lower paying jobs. So we replace higher paying jobs with lower paying jobs, which means the war on the middle class continues. But even having said that, the economy ranks relatively low in terms of the top concern of people. The top concern, fascinating, but it's healthcare. So what this tells me is Democrats need to run no holds barred on Medicare for all, learn all the facts about it, all the information about it, and then just go on the offense and stop at nothing. And if they do that, they'd win across the country. But, of course, as you knew this segment was going to end, it's hard to have the Democrats run on that when many of the Democrats don't believe in that. So we need to get the corporate money out of politics, get the big pharma and health insurance company money out of politics, and then the Democrats are freed up to run on a substantive issue like Medicare for all, and they would win.